Cuando quiera puedes empezar.
Hello everyone.
David Gregor.
My name is Olivier. I am Belgian, living in France and also part of the year here in Mallorca. I'm coming here since more than 50 years and aquí es mi país de corazón. I was a captain and instructor for Air France. I'm also a seaplane pilot and a member of the French Association of Hidroaviacion. And as our president Yves told you, we had this first Congress in 2019 in Rochell, where for the first time we gathered some of the European countries, and some of you were there as well. So this is a resume of what has been told in La Rochelle, and just a primarily important notice is that definitely you will see this is a partial picture. Some of the figures and the numbers that you will see here were not complete. We had not, for instance, all friends from the Northern Europe, and it's very important that they are here today. And also from other countries at that time, we didn't have the complete figures. So don't, you probably will say, well, it's not exactly the situation in my country, but at that time, that was the information we had been able to recover. So, the idea of this first meeting was to make a picture of the current regulation in France, because as Yves said, it was the annual assembly of our association, but also of various European countries. And in La Rochelle there were 11 countries represented, not all present. Some of them they just sent us a presentation without being there in person. Starting by Germany, so Kretschmer was not there, but he sent those figures regarding the number of aircrafts, the number of members, number of companies, etc. And this is what he said about the situation in Germany, that at that time it was only one public hydro surface with PPR. And regarding the strength, well, this association is existing since 40 years, and weaknesses, well, actually, and that's something that you will see in many countries, is that the authorization usually depends upon the local authorities, and could be very different from one region of a single country to another. Austria also not represented in person, but this resume has been sent by Thomas Sleep. Very general rule, well, it's just not allowed. Could grant some exceptional authorization for airshow, something like that. Also with a lot of restriction, but as you read to the last sentence once again, it's very different from one region to another. Belgium, well, it's my homeland. Very complicated countries. We've got, I think, 5 different governments for such a small country. One from the Flemish government, one from the Wallon government, the French-speaking people, one from the German one, and in addition the federal one, plus the one of Brussels. Well, it makes the situation very complicated. So at that time in La Rochelle we had only the picture of the French-speaking side. Today we have the chance to have Dirk de Koster among us, and Dirk will certainly explain you later on the situation on the Flemish side. And this situation, by the way, in the southern part of the country has changed in the bad direction since 2019. The strength at that time in Belgium was this opening of this first hydro base, which in the meantime has been closed, unfortunately, by the Green Ministry of Environment. Yeah, so I'll let you read that so that I don't want to spend too much time. But yeah, that was a situation 2 years ago in Belgium. Spain, definitely this is a very partial picture of Spain because at that time that we had the information that we had here in Mallorca, and those slides had been made together with Miguel at that time. And I know, but certainly we'll discuss that later on, that since 2019 there is a very huge effort of harmonization of the different actors within Spain. So we had at that time, we had no picture of the microlight situation, but definitely this has evaluated, I would say, in a good direction this time. As general rule, the operation of civil seaplanes and sea microlights were prohibited in Spain at that time, and however, Mallorca has been the leader in organizing splashing here in Poyensa. 3 at that time, 2019, 13, 15. In 2017, it was not possible due to the local authorities at that time, but I suppose they've changed in the meantime. And another splashing has been organized after the Rochell meeting, so in the spring of 2019. And well, it has been emphasized during the introduction of this meeting, but obviously the FAM made is still doing a lot of efforts at every level, from the Ayuntamiento to Brussels, so European authorities to make, for instance, this kind of meeting possible. Those was the strength, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats that had been written at that time. Among the strengths, there is a strong history of seaplanes here in Mallorca and in Poyensa. A positive attitude of the Spanish CAA, but you'll see throughout all the presentations, actually most of the European CAA are quite favorable towards hydroaviation. At least they're not going against. The thing is that most of the time they don't have much information, or they don't have the sufficient interaction with the local authorities. Here in Mallorca there is a strong support of Chamber of Trade, Chambre de Commerce in French. Weaknesses, well, the ecologists, but don't take it on the wrong side. We have been talking from the very first stage of the sustainability. It's only the thing that the ecologists have to be more aware of the pro and cons of for activity. And the opportunities, well, there is some kind of financial support from the European communities that have given some financial means in November 18 already, thanks to Miguel again, in order to inform European and North African countries and to organize. It was already planned at that time to organize a first meeting initially for the countries around Mediterranean. Now, in the meantime, it has spread over all Europe or targets. The threats, definitely, it's a non-harmonized regulation within Europe, and also some bad experiences in the past, and especially the experience in Greece, where Greece had received from the European community some subsidies to open more than 100 idle surfaces, but unfortunately part of this money has vanished, and they never managed to realize that project. And the second initiative was in Croatia, where unfortunately they lost the AOC due to safety issues. So the first try were not, unfortunately, very successful. France, well, you're going to see more slides regarding France than other countries, definitely because it was our meeting, and of course it's a bit more detailed. But as you can see here, apart once again the Northern Europe countries that were missing in Rochell, we were very, very happy to have more information from you, from Sweden, Norway, etc. But a part of that part of Europe, probably France is the more active country regarding seaplanes activity and single microlights activity. As you see, we have 700 members, so I mean, pilots flying in France. A very active association like Hidroaviacion of the river sitting close to me, and they will explain you.
Now, today we have 1,200 members.
So you see 700 in 2019, 1,200 members now. So quite a dynamic situation in France. Those are the seaplane hydro bases and microlights on the right hand side, surfaces and bases in France. The number, yeah, that's a detail. I won't spend too much time about it. As all these services is active in France. Regarding the regulation in France, well, there are two bylaws dating 1986, one for seaplanes and one for microlights. Regarding the licenses, well, the France is sticking to the EASA, and well, if you got a type rating, and there is doing a lot of training for getting that type rating, then you got it on your license as any kind of other licenses. Regarding the microlights, the regulation is totally different. There is no special qualification required. The general microlights certificate covers it. For the hydro bases, the local aerodrome regulations applies, which means that, for instance, actually there are only 2 hydro bases in France so far. In Destacar, it's restricted for the based seaplanes, otherwise you have to request a special authorization. And there, which is close to Marseille, where our president is living, there is no special procedure for non-based seaplane, even if you still need a general prior permission required for everybody. For the hydro surfaces, it's quite restrictive procedures. You need to file, I won't go too much into detail, but generally speaking, there's a lot of paperwork to do. And all the time linked to an environmental study, Natura 2000. And then in France, the administrative region person in charge is the prefect, and he needs to contact a lot of different entities before being able to give the green light. It takes at least 30 days, and well, so even if we are a very dynamic country regarding seaplanes activity, it's still very difficult due to the administrative restrictions. Well, the strength, as we have seen it, is the possibility to land outside hydro base, so to open temporary hydro surfaces. But the weaknesses of this is that no permit approved, long and very complicated administrative things, as I say, too many actors implicated. That's something we have seen in various countries. The environmental procedure, we don't discuss the fact that it is necessary, but it's also very complicated. And sometimes also, and that's also something that we have heard from other countries, is that when an authorization is finally given, the authorities are something requesting really strange things, just because they're not aware of the activity itself. So there's something asking safety boards, dedicated markings, and things like that. Yeah, another strength is that simple regulation place, well, I'm just a bit confused and not really sure that this slide is linked to. Oh yeah, sorry, that's me. That was for the seaplanes. For the microlights, in France, the legislation is a bit different. There is a much more simple regulation over the last 30 years. And you can make occasional use of surfaces with much less restrictions than for the seaplanes. The thing is, there is a risk of confusion. As I said before, there are two different texts, and sometimes the people are confusing between the two. The Natura 2000 studies are, as I said, quite complicated, especially to be undertaken by individuals or very small structures. And yes, another thing is, and that was the same case in Belgium as well, there is a fear of mixing activities with the other users of the water surface, the boats, the paddles, etc., etc. And also restriction to some natural parks, which are not always justified, at least in the eyes of the human rights fighters. United Kingdom, our friend John Russell sent us this. Once again, very different regulation depending on the regions. Northern Ireland and Scotland are much more open, few restrictions. In England and Wales, apparently all lakes are considered as private. You just need an authorization by the owner, but it's apparently very rarely granted. And in theory, you can land on all the rivers and navigable rivers at least, but you have to apply the restrictions enforced for the boats. So for instance, the speed restriction, then it's quite difficult to land a seaplane at 5 miles. So that's the wrong effect of it. At the contrary, very few restrictions for sea operations all around the United Kingdom. You can land on the coast. There are about 10 seaplanes in the UK and an increasing activity of microlights. And yeah, among the weaknesses, that's a new point, interesting that we haven't seen in other countries. They emphasize the fact that there is a lack of refueling facilities. If you can land the sea surface, you still need an amphibian if you want to refuel the plane. Of course, as I said before, quite open for sea operation, but sea operation means a lot of corrosion, still complex administrative authorization, unrealistic rules dating from the 30s. They gave us some examples that were definitely applying to those big seaplanes with 6 engines. We don't need them anymore. Yeah. And also difficulties with many harbour authorities for mixed boat and seaplanes operations. Italy, that's our friend Cesare who sent us that. Cesare is among us today. I don't know why at that time we didn't get the figures of sea microlights, and definitely there are a lot of in Italy. Many of them joined us in the last question. So definitely this has to be completed and updated, and all the other ones, but I don't need to present you the Europeo di Como, which is the oldest seaplane flying schools in Europe, maybe in the world, yes. But the interesting point that has been raised in Rochell is that once again, a part of the Northern Europe that we don't know about, definitely Italy is the most open country regarding regulation, as by default all waters are considered as potential occasional hydro surfaces, even if you need a procedure to make them permanent. So the strength for Italy is a very favorable regulation, the most favorable one in Southern Europe definitely. The weaknesses is that the local authorities has no manpower to react when local authorities impose abusive restrictions. And that's also something that we have seen in many countries. Usually the national CAA is not against our activity, but they don't have the manpower to react to local constraint. Yeah, so you see that the Italian, they have a vision. They imagine that we could have more than 5,000 surfaces around Europe. And also, and that's a very interesting point regarding environment. It could be also a very positive aspect in developing seaplane activity, which is that it's much more environmentally friendly to open a hydro base than an airport, regarding, of course, the impact on the environment. Yeah, and the threats over bureaucracy, lack of knowledge of hydroaviation by local authorities, that's definitely one of the main points. Malta, yeah, we had Jen Hatton with us in Rochell. So a very small country, but still interesting, as you will see, because this is Malta, and it's only 316 square kilometers, but they still have 7 places where you can land a seaplane, which is quite impressive. The wrong sides are that we even have one in Grenoble. I don't know if you're familiar with Malta, but it's in the main capital. You can land with a seaplane. Also, it's 326, not 316. But you need the authorization of the director of Malta Airport, which is very close, and that takes some time. But yeah, of course, only sea surfaces, so the corrosion problem exists. Poland, very interesting country as well. Poland, probably also one of the most open in Europe. Since you can also land practically everywhere. There are many lakes. They are organizing a big annual event. Yeah, so a lot of positive things coming from Poland. Portugal, Antonia Rochell was there in Rochell as well. So those are the numbers at that time. And the interesting point is that very recently, but we'll talk about it later on during this Congress, there's been a lot of talks between Spain and Portugal to get more closer and to start to try to work together. Yeah, so they got as well some regulations dedicated to microlights. And here are the strengths and weaknesses. Numerous ideal surfaces available, good air all around, which is definitely not the case in Belgium, for instance. The only ideal surfaces, no hydro base. So I'll let you read, but you'll see that that's the interesting point. The same issues are coming from every country most of the time. The opportunities, once again, that's the vision of our Portuguese friends. They want to invest more in their training and equipment. They want to have a more clear text into the regulation. And the weaknesses, well, in Portugal there are few investment capacity and resistance to change and adaptation and rejection of the unknown. I think this is a very important one as well. Switzerland, Alex is here. Where are you, Alex? Yeah, he's here today. Okay. So he was in Rochell as well, if I remember. And those are the figures that he gave us at that time. And Switzerland, once again, that's the process to get an authorization. You first need to have the agreement of the city, of the town, then of the province, then of the CAA. But the Swiss Seaplane Association is organizing between 4 and 5 meetings a year for quite a long time. They're a very active association, since 17 years, but they're not very optimistic of being, or they were not, maybe it has changed in the meantime, they were not very optimistic of being able to do more in Switzerland so far. So that's it, that was the main topics about the La Rochelle meeting, and as a general conclusion, and I'm sure that we're going to discuss all of those points during the next 2 days. Regulation not harmonized within Europe, lack of knowledge by local authorities leads to denial of authorization or unrealistic or non-necessary constraints. Effort must then be deployed on local authorities, probably rather than on national CEA, thanks to the EASA. And environmental opposition is a growing issue, even if often not based on facts. So we have to educate the people. And what should we do? Well, definitely to exchange between us regarding best practices with local authorities. I think here it's a very good example of what can be done. To exchange as much information as possible regarding environmental studies and impacts, insurance issues, training program, and still keeping lobbying on European and national levels to encourage them to adapt the legislation and rules of the more open countries, Italy, Poland, and also convinced that hydroaviation can be also an ecological solution compared to the construction or enlargement of new airports. And just a small caution point, which was very important in France, within our own association, is that in some countries the regulation is much less restrictive for microlights and for seaplanes, and in our wish of harmonization, we must be cautious not to endanger that relative free hands that they have so far. Derek, do you want to add something? Or?
Since La Rochelle, we made some evolution in our regulation, and we have a meeting with the French DGAC in order to organize something, a standard procedure, a destination of the préfet, in order that we have the same rules to open some water bodies in France. And we are waiting now for the end of this initiative, and I hope that before the end of this year we can have this procedure in order to convince all the French authorities to have the same mode of regulation to open the water bodies.
Jesus, it is 10:45. I'm right on schedule, but unfortunately I've seen there is a debate. No more time for that. Thank you very much.
We have now coffee break, 10 minutes, right? Rest time. Tenemos ahora 10 minutos de descanso para la cátedra.